Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and it seems you only get so many days between Christian Horner and Toto Wolff having a dig at each other. This time it's Horner suggesting that the supposed rule changes for next season are not for the safety reasons the FIA says they are, rather to favour one particular team. Meanwhile, he also reckons Mercedes are getting ever closer to the pace of the frontrunners. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. This past weekend, Max Verstappen became the driver with the most ever starts and races for Red Bull, kind of incredible. But yeah, there he is at 130. Mark Webber overtaking him with 129. Wanted to mention McLaren real quick because Norris was kind of surprised at Alonso's pace this weekend, saying that he was really pushing hard, really hard all the whole time. But I felt like Fernando was chilling the entire race, and we saw that pretty massive gap that Russell established rather easily between himself and Fernando. It seems like Alonso races nowadays just because he knew that there was no better than P6 that race. Like, okay, he felt like he was never going to catch up, understandably so, to the guys in front, so he's just sitting there creating the train behind him, maintaining the gap and make sure he's fast on certain parts of the circuit where he can ensure that that gap is maintained. Just driving, I think, very intelligently. Doesn't matter if Alonso finishes 1 second behind P5 or 30 seconds behind. If he knows he can't make the overtake, might as well make sure the tyres are saved and keep everyone else behind, just like he did in Monaco not too long ago. Now on the Riccardo side of the McLaren garage, kind of incredible to look at the numbers actually so far this season in terms of points scored. Riccardo has like 19% of McLaren's points. Of course, that meaning Norris that has 81% of their points, which is quite something. But he does say this: I can still win races. Give me a winning car and I will win. I don't feel like I've ever left a win on the table. That's the challenge that lies ahead of us with myself and with McLaren. Let's figure this out. I want to take on this challenge with you, I suppose, and the rest of the guys. So, I mean, look, that pretty much says that Riccardo will be staying there next year. There has been some rumours. What are they going to do with Riccardo? Is he going to stay in that McLaren seat? Are they going to ship him off? The team has kind of wondered about that as well, but they seem more confident now, or at least the words that they're saying are more in Riccardo's favour now than they have been for the last couple of months or so, really. So more than likely, Riccardo, Norris still the pairing next season at McLaren, but after that, if things don't change, it's hard to see his contract getting renewed. Of course, look, Toto Wolff believes that Mercedes still a rather significant gap to Red Bull and Ferrari. That is, of course, evident when you watch the races. There has been the talk, of course, about the mid-season flexi floor changes that Christian Horner at Red Bull says isn't going to affect their car at all, but you have to wonder how much that's really true because they've got a few weeks to figure this out. But Toto Wolff said that when the flexi floor exploit is gone from Ferrari and Red Bull, that will be worth 2 or 3 tenths of a second, which is the same gap that Mercedes believe they currently lack on most circuits, so that maybe we have an equal pecking order by the time we get to Belgium. But Belgium, long straight, maybe Red Bull could be favoured around there. Of course, the Hungaroring, though, could be a very different story this upcoming weekend. Now, we got some more drama about this, right? There's no surprises here. Whenever rule changes, regulation changes are being discussed, some teams at the top aren't going to agree with them. Some teams not at the top are largely going to agree with them. So there's two separate topics here. Firstly, there's the technical directive, which is coming in from the Belgian Grand Prix, which the idea there is that it's going to address the porpoising by meaning that if your car is bouncing too much, the ride height is going to be forced up on your car. That's probably not going to affect too many teams nowadays because most teams seem to have been able to dial that out. The other part of it is the flexi floor drama, where apparently Red Bull and Ferrari are using two separate pieces of their floor, such that one of the pieces can deflect more than is actually meant to be allowed. The FIA is stamping them out, and Horner reckons that exploit is worth 2 or 3 tenths of a second, and Mercedes engineers are seemingly quite gutted. They didn't think of this idea a little bit earlier either. That's one part. Horner says he doesn't really have a problem with that. What he's got a problem is technical changes for next season, right? Because we've got this set of regulations. The teams are already developing next year's cars. Horner doesn't want to feel like, okay, the entire regulations are changing while we're already in development of the new car, especially with budget cap issues and stuff like this. But of course, the idea is from Toto Wolff is like, it's a safety issue, right? The cars have to be safer to drive than they presently are. So Christian Horner's perspective from Red Bull is that, well, they're effectively doing this to benefit Mercedes. As he says, there's an awful lot of lobbying from Mercedes and others to change next year's regulations significantly, so a certain team, obviously being Mercedes, can run its car lower and benefit from that concept. Now, Wolff responded to this saying, I think he's just bored being at the front of the grid. I don't know what he's referring to, because at the end of the day, we're all part of the same circus. We all work with the same stakeholders. Lobbying, is he not lobbying? He sits in his office and doesn't call anyone, right? So effectively saying, look, I mean, Horner is here talking about these concepts, talking about this stuff to the media. Obviously, he's lobbying for his point, just as other teams are for their point on this issue. Asked about the threat of rival teams taking legal action over the issue, he says, you wonder why they are fighting so hard. This is rather spicy, really, because Red Bull have said, like, oh yeah, well, if this technical change goes through for next season, we might take legal action that the FIA aren't allowed to change the rules this much. The rumour has it that what the FIA want to do is force the floors of the cars to be raised up by 25 millimeters, which effectively should prevent them bouncing around and being so stiff as they currently are, and maybe should counteract porpoising as well. Red Bull are saying, well, look, 25 millimeters, that's a completely different set of aero challenges that you're facing the teams with here. If you force us to raise the floor, then we have to completely redesign the rest of the car to align with that. Whereas Mercedes are saying, well, you know, look, it's a safety issue here. We've got to try and dial these out. So it's a bit of a mess, to be honest. But as he does say, you wonder why they're fighting so hard for this. If Red Bull are saying we're going to take legal action, might well be because, as Toto Wolff seems to believe, they think they're going to get hurt pretty hard by this potential change, which might be a valid interpretation of the actions that we have going on right now. Like, even as he goes on to say, I read in the media that it's not relevant, that it's not a big change. Why are they fighting for it or threatening to go legal? I think maybe he is conflating the technical directive here and next year's changes, because I think it's only really the coming technical directive that Horner has said doesn't matter for them, and next year's changes will matter at least to some degree, but he reckons it's just posing effectively that Horner is doing right now. And this is what he goes on to explain exactly what this issue is that the FIA are trying to prevent next year. There's an inherent issue on the cars that we are not seeing in the last few tracks because they have been so flat, but it didn't go away. What we saw in Baku, what we saw in Monaco, like, that hasn't gone away. It's just the tracks have been much smoother. These cars are way too stiff and they bounce around. If you ask the driver, you will probably have a majority that, if asked anonymously, rather interesting, because if you were to ask Max Verstappen and Perez publicly, they would probably take the line that the team wants to go with. Whereas apparently when asked privately, all the teams, all the drivers agreed anonymously that, apart from Fernando Alonso was the rumour at the time, that the suspension of the cars, they're too stiff. It's not like bouncing necessarily porpoising. It's more like when you go over a bump, the car just really suffers and bounces around so much. And like, maybe they want ways to deal with that next season for the safety issues that Hamilton especially suffered in Baku. The talking point was there from Horner, right? Raise the height of the car or raise the ride height, and therefore Hamilton won't experience those issues, which I think is probably true to a degree, but it's also the design of the cars which makes them so stiff that actually is a serious issue, which a lot of drivers face that weekend, even if they did run their cars slightly higher. So Toto Wolff's perspective is, I think it's not a matter of compromise about technical regulations, it's about technical regulations that protect the drivers, and if these cars are too stiff and too bouncy, let's do something about that right now. Clearly, when you're running at the front, you want to just make sure nothing changes, and when you're not running at the front, you want to make sure a lot changes, right? So at least he's accepting that there is a bias inherent when you are the front runners compared to not being the front runners, but Horner, of course, has a different perspective on the matter, and saying something I thought was rather strong, really, that for the FIA, safety is a very easy card to stand behind, or maybe, well, for Mercedes as well. Mercedes can sit there saying, look, we want these changes just for safety reasons. The FIA can say, yeah, we want these changes just for safety reasons, but Horner's thinking, well, hang on a second here, lads, are we sure it's just for safety, or are you trying to favour one team or another? He went on to say, I didn't see any issues here in France. I think the last 3 or 4 races, you really didn't see any issues with the bouncing. Toto Wolff's going to say, well, look, that's because of the tracks we were at, not because the cars have changed particularly. And as he says, I think there just needs to be a common sense solution, not rewriting the rule book for next year at this point in the season with the budget cap as it is. It's even a bigger issue for smaller teams that might have to kind of change things, right? It's not just Red Bull that oppose these changes for next season that Mercedes are seemingly supporting. It's other teams as well that have got to work, and maybe the budget cap will hurt them to a degree. He goes on to say, though, I'd actually dispute that it's a safety issue. It's down to how a team chooses to operate its car. You can remove the porpoising very easily, but that's at the sacrifice of performance. So I do think that sometimes they're talking like past each other in a way, because I think Toto, yes, he's talking about the porpoising, but he's also talking about the bouncing that these cars have just inherently, even without the aerodynamic porpoising, the mechanical bouncing over bumps, regardless of the actual porpoising phenomenon, is also worse on these cars than it has been in the past. And that's definitely part of the safety issues that Hamilton especially was dealing with back in Baku. So it's obviously difficult to determine here, and everyone is going to have their biases, but you know, as Horner says, they shouldn't be overreacting based on a few samples of one-off circuits. And then he goes on to say it's too late now to redesign a car. If you're making us raise the floor height by 25 millimeters, that's a completely different set of aerodynamics, right? So he's saying, look, the FIA are basically just hiding behind this safety card, and it's not really about safety, it's about trying to help Mercedes, which is quite the statement. And then Toto Wolff is sitting there thinking, well, if you're really opposing this as heavily as you are and threatening to take legal action, then you wonder if this is actually a key issue for Red Bull's performance that they are currently generating. So we'll see what the FIA come up with, right? If teams want a more compromise and they want to only raise the right height of the floor by 10 millimeters or whatever. That's been the current rumor, but it seems likely that some of these changes will take place for next year, but maybe not to quite the extent that Mercedes want them to. But yeah, these two continue to go at it. The final thing to mention here, of course, is the current topic, because of course this stuff we won't see for quite some time, or the current pace of the cars. We saw that, well, of course, Mercedes managed to put 2 cars on the podium for the first time this season. Christian Horner seems somewhat concerned that Mercedes are closing the gap. In terms of straight line speed right now, of course, there is absolutely no contest, but you know, as Horner says, not especially surprised at the top speed disadvantage of Mercedes. At the end, Max was reasonably comfortable, but you can see they're chipping away. They are getting closer, so it does seem like he is concerned about the Mercedes comeback, really, like this season, also next season as well. The Mercedes are chipping away. They're making progress here. Maybe with the flexi floor changes, they'll get closer. Maybe with further upgrades in Hungary and beyond, Mercedes will continue to chip away at that lead, so it's possible. And of course, Hamilton just reached his 300th Grand Prix last weekend. No driver has actually ever won a race after their 300th Grand Prix, but already on his 300th Grand Prix, Hamilton's second place was the best ever placement that a driver has had after reaching their 300th Grand Prix, which is rather interesting, so I'm sure there is more to come. Hamilton's going to keep competing until at least he wins another race. Just to mention this for Budapest this weekend, though, because could be a key turning point in the championship. Maybe it looks like Verstappen's got this locked up, but you know, who knows what Ferrari can deliver. Should be a great circuit for them. Good circuit generally for Hamilton. Shouldn't favour the Red Bull car particularly well, but rain could play a factor once again, as it did last year, of course. Rather interestingly, into that turn 1 when Bottas went bowling a little bit, and apparently a 70% chance-ish of rain over the session this weekend. So yes, a wet qualifying could be in order in Budapest. Could make things kind of spicy. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.